Almost everyone. All right. How about second NDC? Okay. Third? No? Okay. So two and fewer. Um, I've been privileged to speak at a number of NDC conferences. I did NDC Sydney virtually with my wife. We gave a talk on burnout. I was at NDC Oslo last November. Oslo, anybody been to Oslo? Been to Oslo. Beautiful city, right? Amazing city. If you have not been to Oslo, I do recommend it. It was a good time. And so I really enjoyed my time there. Now I'm here in Porto, another city I've never been to, and I'm super happy to be here. We're going to be timely, so we will start on time. I'm Anjuan Simmons, and thank you for coming to my talk about leadership lessons from the Agile Manifesto. And I just want to start out by saying again, I didn't say this before, I am an American. I am from Houston, Texas. And so I am a Texan born and raised. And being here in Porto has reminded me that Europe's just a little bit different. One of the things that I found to be different was that the coffees are so small. I'm like, it's like a spoonful of coffee. And I see people in cafes, they will take that spoonful of coffee and drink it for like 2 hours. I'm like, how is that possible? I'm from America where we have like grande cappuccinos or venti that are this big and you can fill a swimming pool with our coffee. It's just the difference between Europe and America. One of the other differences is that I walked across this famous bridge here, and that bridge is really high, but I noticed that the railings are really low, meaning that if you just trip over a fall, you're going to go over the edge. Like in America, we build fences over the sides of our bridges, maybe because we're more clumsy. And it's just amazing how countries view safety differently. Speaking of safety, people in Porto drive really fast. I was in an Uber for the first time, and the driver there were no other cars on the road, and he sped up. I'm like, are we being chased? Why are you driving so fast? There's like no reason to go this fast. But I guess that they really like fast cars in Europe, right? Yeah, this is the continent where you have BMWs, Mercedes, and all these other great cars. All right, so I do want to say that if your title has manager in it, if you are a senior engineering manager or engineering manager and you're feeling weird about being at a talk about leadership, don't feel weird. You are in the right room. And that's because leadership and management are not the same. And I want to be very clear. Leadership and management are not the same, but every leader has a little manager inside of them, and every manager has a little leader inside of them. So they operate on a continuum, right? Leadership is strategic, it's broad, it's talking about how the company can go forward over the next 3, 4, or 5 years. Whereas management is tactical, it's specific, it's efficient, right? Managers often have to think about the immediate needs of the people that they are managing. And so the word picture that I use to describe the difference between management and leadership. So leadership is like a general who says, take that city. We're going to take that city. Let's take that city because we need it, because they're thinking about the entire war, not just that one city. A manager is like a captain who's like, well, first, we have to heal all the wounded from the last city that we took. And we need to resupply the army because we're running low on food. And we need to make sure that we have a plan for getting to take this city, right? That's, in general, the difference between leadership and management. And so they're really important. But again, managers have to have leadership goggles that they put on to know, okay, my team is in this certain area, but how do we fit into the long-term vision of the company? And also leaders, whether you're a VP or a CEO, you have to also get tactical sometimes. So I just want to be clear that it is a continuum, and these leadership lessons will also apply to those of you who are managers. So I'm going to use the term leader and manager interchangeably for the remainder of this presentation. So I've always been fascinated by leadership. I've always loved leadership. Like, my favorite characters on any show are the leaders. If you have any show that you name that I've watched, I'm going to always go toward the leader because I always wanted to understand what makes leadership tick. I've always believed that leadership makes a difference. Leaders make a difference. And so I've always wanted to become a better leader. And so I've tried a variety of things over the years to be able to understand what I can do to become to become a better leader. And I found a few years ago when I became a certified Scrum Master and learned about the Agile Manifesto that those 4 values have powerful lessons for leadership. And we're going to get to those about at the midpoint of my presentation, but I just want to share with you a little bit about my journey toward becoming a leader. And so it really came down to when I was young, right? And again, I grew up loving heroes. I was a comic book kid when I was a kid. I loved comic books. I loved Marvel more than DC, but DC has Batman, so DC's cool. And I love sci-fi shows. And I realized that there was a reason that I loved heroes so much. And so there was a book written by Joseph Campbell called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Who's heard of this book? No one. All right, look at this. Today you learned. So Joseph Campbell was someone who came up with something called the hero's journey. And so he described it like this, right? A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. I'm just going to read this. Fabulous forces are encountered and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. Now, take any sci-fi show that you can think about, they're probably going to use this formula. But let's dig a little bit more into what Campbell calls the hero's journey with an example. And we're going to use a well-known hero who I love a lot. So let's take this hero, and then let's take the wheel of the hero's journey. All right, I'm just going to use this as a metaphor. So there are 4 parts to the hero's journey. One, there's the call to adventure, right? There's something that happens, there's some inciting event that brings the hero into the action. But then there's these extreme trials that the hero goes through, and the hero is tested. But then you have this transformation process, and so the trials that the hero goes through changes the hero. They become better than they were before. And then you have the road back, because every story almost always ends with going home. All right. So let's dig a little bit more into these 4 parts, right? So you have the hero that's in this ordinary world, right? And it's very important that in most stories, you have these 2 realms. You have the ordinary world and you have the supernatural world. And then the hero is in the ordinary world, toiling away, cursing their lives, bored to death. But then there's a call. Something happens that the hero feels compelled to do, but there's usually some refusal. Normally, like, oh, I have obligations, or I'm scared, or I don't think I'm qualified. There's this reason, there's some reason that the hero ignores the call. But eventually, the hero gets a mentor. And that mentor is someone who has done what the hero has done, right? All a mentor is they've gone on the hero's journey before, and they're coming back to help this new person go on the same journey. But then things happen. They cross over fully into the supernatural world. They have this approach where they come to, they go past numerous trials, and then they come to the big ordeal, right? That's usually what most people who play video games call like the boss level, right? You know, the boss level, that's the ordeal. There's some reward that the hero gets from this experience, and then they go back home armed with what Campbell calls a boon, some gift that they can use to bestow on the people who are back in the ordinary world, right? That's the hero's journey. You can probably think of your own stories that map right to this. But then when I thought about my career in software development, and I've been doing this for over 25 years, I found kind of myself mapped to this metaphor, right? And for me, it was leaving the world of the analog to go to the digital, right? Not going from the ordinary world to the supernatural, but it was making the journey into understanding computer programming languages and starting that journey. And, you know, I had trials. I took data structures in C. Who took that class? Remember that class? Or does anyone learn C? Remember that class? Wow, almost took it out. You know, I was electrical engineering as an undergrad major, and I took data structures in C. I almost became pre-med. Like, I would have been Dr. Anjuan Simmons. Yeah, but I persisted, and I kept going. And so as I went through my engineering career, I got boons, right? I got skills and I got insights that I apply even to my people who are not in the world of computer science because I became a logical and structured thinker, right? That's how the hero's journey works. That's how it maps to being in software development. And so I took these lessons and I began to understand that a lot of these aspects rang true for me, but really it was the mentor part, right? That was really what was key to my development. So a large part of my early leadership style was being a mentor, helping people understand, okay, I've seen this problem 1,000 times. Here's how you solve it, right? Scott Hanselman in his keynote said, is it DNS? All right, that's what a mentor, right? Because they've seen DNS be the problem so many times. And so I really leaned into mentoring. And then I saw this interchange between mentor and mentee, and the mentee becomes a mentor to someone else, right? One of the biggest myths of our time is Star Wars, right? And so you see this cycle of this person who passes it on to this person, who mentors this person, who mentors this person, right? And so you see this cycle of mentorship. Now, I really can't use this too much because it involves like a lightsaber being handed down, and I don't really have a lightsaber to hand down, but you get the point. So many times, stories are the story of someone who was mentoring others. But as I got to college, I began to learn about more rigorous ways of thinking about leadership. And I began to read books, right? And so one book that I love is The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John C. Maxwell. And he has 21 laws of leadership, right? It's a very self-explanatory title. And I highly recommend that you read this. If you want to upgrade your leadership style, I highly recommend getting this book. But I love this part of the book, the law of influence. The true measure of leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. It's all about influence. If you want to be a better leader, you have to grow your influence. You have to be able to take a team that is assigned to you and get them to do things, right? That's what influence is. And there's another book that I found by James McGregor Burns. Again, he didn't bury the lead in the title of this book. It's called Leadership. And so he said something very similar, right? There are two types of leaders. There are transactional leaders who use rewards and punishments to manage people, right? And you've worked with these managers, haven't you? Where they say, you should do this because I say so. I'm the senior manager. I'm the VPE. I have this title and I have things that I can use to make you feel really good, like promotions and salaries, or to make you feel really bad, like not getting on that project that you want to work on, or I can fire you straight out, right? Those are transactional leaders. Now that's in contrast with transformational leaders, and it's cut off at the bottom, but a transformational leader is someone who has a style where they use their charisma and enthusiasm to influence the people that they're leading, right? And so that's that word influence ringing true. And now I move from mentoring to influence. What can I do to be a better influencer for the teams that I lead? And so, who's heard the term code smells? You know the term code smells, right? And so when you're working on a code base and maybe you're reviewing a PR or you're refactoring and you see things that, like, it's not breaking anything yet, but you need to improve it, right? Those are code smells, right? Super large methods, or the directory structure is not set up in a way that's easy to understand, or it's not readable, clean code, right? These are code smells. And I realized that if I'm going to hang my leadership hat on influence, I needed to understand what are the influence smells, right? What are the things that I encounter where, like, my team's not broken yet, but it's not operating to the degree that I think it should, right? And so when I begin to try to figure out what are the influence smells, what are the things that I can detect by just working with my team that can help me to understand where is my influence strong and where is it weak? And what can I do to make my influence better, right? So if leadership is influence, we really have to be able to have strong influence smell ability. And so, the good thing about code smells is that it lets you make quick decisions whenever you're doing something. And influence smells work the same way. As you lead your teams, and I don't know how many of you are like senior managers or VPs or where you are on your journey, you're going to be hit with decisions every day. And you almost never have time to read a book or to Google and look for an answer, right? So you need to have some rubric that you can use to figure out, okay, what am I going to do with this problem that is really deep? It's not well defined, but I need to solve it right now, right? You need some way to do that. And as I began to grow in my career, I came across the Agile Manifesto, right? And so I think we all heard this tale, right? You had these 17 people who gathered in a ski lodge in Utah called Snowbird. And these were people who had built software. They were all seasoned software developers. And they came to talk about what can they do to improve software development. They clearly also talked about diversity and inclusion at that ski lodge. I'm just joking. They didn't talk about that. But they had backgrounds in what was called back then extreme programming or Scrum or other types of working on software. Now, often when we hear about this story, you probably think of people like, wearing white robes, who are in big hallways, who are agreeing on everything. No, they fought bitterly. They disagreed bitterly, but they came up with things that they could agree on. And they came up with what we now call the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. So let me stop. Who has not heard of this? Anyone here? So you've all heard of the Agile Manifesto. Good. All right, look at that. Let's go. All right. So here's how it reads, right? And so you can go and read this online, and I signed the online version because I'm a nerd like that. But it starts out like this: we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Now, so many people read that first sentence and they rush past it. But it's the first sentence for a reason. These people were, in the 1990s, they were uncovering. They did not say, we have uncovered some way that if everyone does it, software development is going to be so much better. Like, that's not what they said. They were uncovering, and how were they doing it? By building software. And you all, if you're building software, I would imagine that you're uncovering ways to build software too, right? We're all involved in agile development, right? Maybe we're not using something that on the tin says Scrum or Kanban or whatever. But if we adhere to the values, that's agile development. I really hope that you're not just, if you're using agile at your companies, that you're not just saying, okay, we have burn down charts and we do story points and we have all these things. We're agile. Really? But are you really? Right? Agile is a mindset. It's a way of looking at work, looking at the realities of your company, the realities of your teams, and figuring out this is what we need to do to tailor these values to the reality of what's on the ground, right? That's what Agile is, right? So I just want to pause here because often people rush past that first sentence, but that first sentence is super important. And so, again, through this work of building software, they come to value four things: individuals and interactions over processes and tools, right? That's the first value. Then working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over negotiating contract, and responding to change over following a plan. Again, you've all been familiar with these values. And then they end by saying, while there's value on the stuff on the right, we really prefer and we value the items on the left more. And so what I want to do during this talk is go through these four values and help you understand what are the influence smells. What are the things that you can do to operate in these values, to make leadership decisions quickly, and to understand what direction should you take? And I think that there are powerful lessons in the Agile Manifesto. I think it's really powerful. That's why I'm excited to be here with you this afternoon. All right. So the first value, again, is about individuals and interactions. And so what you can do here, if you can distill this value, you can grow what I call team influence, right? That's influence over the people that you're managing. Now, again, when I talk about teams, and I'm sure everyone here has either worked on a team or you're managing a team, um, often when people say, oh, well, the Agile Manifesto says that we should not have processes and we shouldn't have tools. Like, that's not true, right? There's value to process. There's value to tools. But I like the old saying that says, if you have the right people, any process or tool is going to work. But if you don't have the right people, no process or tool is going to work. People are fundamental to software development. Maybe someday machine learning or AI is going to come to the degree where it's going to like write itself and we'll all have to find other careers. But that's not going to happen in my lifetime, right? If you're going to build software, you need to have people. You need to make sure that they work well together. And that means that you have to develop the ability to lead and influence the people who build software. And so I've seen many ways of people trying to influence software developers. Before the pandemic, you know, we've all been to the big offices. I've walked into the offices of Facebook and Twitter, and when I was in Budapest, I went into the Prezi office, and you know, it has all these nice amenities, and there's like beer in the kitchen, and there's all these things. And people think, oh, that's how you influence software developers. And all that means nothing, right? When a software developer is going something, having beer on tap is not going to help very much. In fact, it may actually make things worse. So we try to do all these things to help influence software developers. Daniel Pink talked about autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and you've probably read books about what you can do to build your team influence. But the way that I distill individuals and interactions down is just to something called dignity, right? And this is the lesson. Preserve dignity at all costs. Everyone on your team has some level of dignity. You have the human dignity that you get by being a human, by being born into this world. But hopefully you have the dignity of experiences, right? You have people who loved you when you're growing up, but you're gonna have some people who had a rougher route or path to get into you. So you're gonna get these people who are gonna come on your team and you're gonna have to work with them. And so I asked Google, what is dignity? Well, Google said that dignity is the state or quality of being worthy of honor or respect. And so again, there's lots of ways that you can build influence. There's lots of ways that you can preserve dignity. But I want to spend some time talking about two things that aren't talked about at conferences like NDC. In fact, very few conferences talk about that. I want to talk about hiring, and I want to talk about firing. How many of you have hiring responsibilities on your teams currently, right? Right. I'm hiring right now. A senior JavaScript engineer, a Java engineer, and a PHP engineer, right? Because that's basically our stack at Help Scout. The hiring process at so many companies is broken, just to be honest. It's not optimized for the people involved, it's optimized for the company. And the hiring process is ripe for dignity, because I'm telling you, if you are a manager who has the responsibility to hire people on your team, there is no greater responsibility. There's nothing that you can do that will influence your team than the people you add to your team. And I always say, when you add someone to your team, you got a new team. So you have to approach that with extreme seriousness. I spend a lot of time hiring. I have a bunch of other things that compete for my time as an engineering coach at Help Scout, but there's nothing I take more seriously than the hiring process. Because you can spend weeks and months building a team that has psychological safety, they have healthy practices, but if you hire the one wrong person, that can be destroyed almost overnight. So it's extremely important that you focus on hiring. If you are hiring, don't shirk reading through the resumes, understanding who is this person who is coming to the interview, go through their job history, where have they worked, how long were they there, what did they learn? But your hiring process also needs to be infused with dignity. Here's how we hire at Help Scout. The first interview that we do is done by me as the hiring manager. It's called the value add interview. And we don't call it a culture fit. process, because that term kind of has been thrown around. I don't believe in culture fit, because a lot of companies are homogenous, right? They're composed of people who all look the same. And hiring someone who's different, usually for that person, is not a good experience. What you should be doing when you hire someone to join your team is you should understand who is this person and what are they going to add to my team. And again, going back to the first value, what are the individuals and the interactions on my team, and what is this person going to come into those individuals, and what are they going to do? Also, my teams are healthy, right? I pride myself on building really healthy teams. Well, we have interactions, right? We do our stand-ups in the Slack channel. We don't do in-person stand-ups because we're across multiple time zones. And so we have a standard, what did I work on since the last stand-up? What am I doing today? What are my blockers? But we also have like a little fun style. We'll say, oh, I learned how to surf this weekend, and we do things. Well, that's an interaction that someone's going to come into. So at HealthScout, we actually published our interview questions for the value add and for the technical screens. They're public. There's the GitHub repo. If you go to HealthScout's GitHub repo and go to the HealthScout repo and go to interview-questions, you can read what we ask in interviews. Now, we publish a lot of questions. We don't go through all of them, but I've had candidates who, before they interviewed me, or they came to an interview where I'm interviewing them, they pulled down the questions, had answers, they were very well prepared. And we did this, and I pushed for this, because there was a bit of a debate on Twitter about should tech companies publish the interview questions online. And the reason that I pushed for this are a few. One, you got people who are really good at interviewing. They're not great employees, but man, can they interview well? And there are other people who aren't, right? There are other people who they just need a second to just come up with an answer. I'm that person. I have been on an interview so many times where they ask me a question and I think about it and I give an answer. And then when I'm pulling out of the parking garage, I'm like, I had a better answer. Oh, I didn't say that. I know you've been through that too, right? And so by giving people access to the questions, then you give them the ability to be properly prepared. And so all those people who need a second, like me, you have that. Also, at HealthScout, we are a global company. We're headquartered in America, but we have so many languages that are spoken at HealthScout. And for a lot of people, English is not their native tongue, right? They didn't grow up speaking English. And so when you are talking to someone or you do our interviews in English, by publishing them ahead of time, we wanted to show compassion. We wanted to show dignity by letting them read the questions in advance and do the bit of the translation, be ready for that. So it was an act to level the playing field of the people who were coming to our company to interview. It was an act of inclusion, but it's also a communication of HealthScout, right? You can read our questions. You can see what we're looking for. And the two questions that I asked to figure out how will this candidate work with my team? How will this candidate work with the individuals and the interactions of the team that I'm managing? There aren't questions really about team at all. And it's a simple question. Tell me about a typical day that you go through, right? These people are usually working engineers. And I can tell by how they answer that question, how they think about teams. Because if all they talk about is technology, and they talk about their daily stand-up, and we use Jira like everyone else does, and I pick up my tickets, and then I work on my tickets, and then I go to the Scrum Master, or I talk to the product owner or whatever, and I get new tickets, and I want to make sure that I get my tickets done fast. If they never mention the team, that's a smell, right? That's a smell. That's something that they may not value the people. The other question that I asked to understand how this person is going to work with the individuals and the interactions of my team is, what are the top 3 things that you're looking for in your next role? And I've heard things like, oh, I want to work in React, or I want to work in Kotlin, or I want to make sure that it's remote. If they never say, I want a healthy team, That's a smell. This person may not really value working on teams. And it helps out teams make the difference. I mean, the team is the essential unit of software development. Again, that doesn't mean that this person is not going to be a good ad, but I do follow up when I ask that question. And again, some people, when we started publishing the questions online, people said, well, what if people just kind of rehearse their answers, right? They write all this stuff and they rehearse. Well, guess what? I have the power to follow up. You can't rehearse that because you don't know what I'm going to ask, right? All right, so those are the two questions that I asked during the interview to figure out who is this person coming to my team. That's how I build this value, this Agile value into hiring, all right? Very important. So I don't know what your hiring process is at your company. I'm happy to talk about it. I love talking about hiring. Again, it is the best part of my job, but it's the part of my job that keeps me up at night. Because I'm telling you, I've hired people that, I wish I could have unfortunately unhired them or threw them back or, hopped into a time machine and gone back in time, like flew around the earth and made the earth spin backwards. I'm just kidding. That doesn't work. All right. Hiring. It's a great place to practice dignity because you're hiring people that are going to affect team dignity, right? Individual people have dignity, but your team as a group also has dignity. So you want to be extremely careful in who you add to the team. All right, let's talk about firing. Now, over my career, I've had to separate people from the organization. And those have been some of the darkest times in my career. I mean, I remember like pretty much every second of that day when I realized, okay, I'm going to have to let this person go. And I have to admit that I've gotten better at firing people, but I never want to be great at it. I really don't even want to be very good. I just want to be able to do it because I'm letting someone who I had high hopes for and worked with, and this person wasn't able to perform. And in a lot of cases, that's on me as the manager, right? I'm always going to question myself, right? How was the onboarding? And we have like all these JavaScript kind of accelerators, and we have all these run books, and like what wasn't there? So in many ways, not in every case, but in most cases, when you're letting someone go, you're admitting to failure on the part of the organization and that person, but a lot of it means that the organization has failed. So how can you preserve dignity during the firing process? Well, I'm going to walk you through a firing that I had to go through. I'm going to be a bit hand-wavy because I want to preserve the dignity of this person even today, even though a lot of time has passed. And so Kevin Goldsmith, if you don't know who Kevin Goldsmith is, he's a well-known speaker. Some of you may know me from the Lead Developer series of talks that I do, Lead Dev Together, and I'm the series host for Lead Dev Together. And Kevin does a great talk about, I think he calls it firing like a human. And so the Lead Dev Together stuff is usually behind a paywall, so I don't know if you can get to it, but follow, if you Google Kevin Goldsmith Twitter, you can find Kevin, and you can ask him questions about this because he's really a pro at this. But what I learned from Kevin, what I learned from experience, is when you're firing someone, it should never be a surprise. It should never be a surprise. You should, well in advance, let this person know, hey, the bar is here. This is where you are. This is what you need to do to close that gap. This should be something that you actively work on. The industry has a standard called a PIP. You ever heard of a PIP? Performance Improvement Plan. I don't like PIPs. So many times there are a list of impossible, like the labors of Hercules tasks that this person can't do, but you need an excuse to fire them. So we don't do PIPs at Helps Out. I haven't done a PIP in years because I think that like what you really want from a PIP is you want a plan. You want to be able to check in with this person on a regular basis, and you want to be able to let them know, are they making improvements or they're not? And so with this person that I had to let go well in advance, and I'm going to be a little bit cynical, but you need to have your documentation. You need to have like in your one-to-one document, as you're talking with this individual, talked about this, they committed that they would do this, and then you follow up and say, did they do it or not? You should have Slack conversations where you document, hey, I communicated to this person that this is what was expected. They didn't do it. Because at the end of the day, one thing that you want to do when you have to fire someone is that you need to get your HR function involved. We call it people ops at Help Scout. Talk to the people whose job is people. And ideally, you want to get them involved early. One mistake that I used to make is I kept my VPE very much involved. Like early on, I would tell my VPE, hey, this person is struggling in these areas, and this is what I'm doing to help to close the gap. And then maybe a month or two later say, is it going too well? Can you help me? Okay, get advice from my manager. Try that. Partial success. So I always kept my VPE involved, but I was always slow to let HR be involved. And so I've corrected that. I make sure that my HR business partner is well aware of the people on my team. And some of you work at startups where they might not even be a formal person. Find someone else to make sure that you're not the only one who knows that this person is struggling, right? Because dignity, this person deserves to know that they were let go for a reason, that there were things that they did, that they had multiple chances. And so when I finally got to the firing event, and one thing I hate about our industry is that this almost always has to be a surprise. And for legal reasons, we really can't say, hey, you, on Thursday, we're going to have a meeting where I'm going to fire you. Really can't do that in our industry. You almost always have to come up with some reason to meet with this person, and then you have the script, right? And so by partnering with my HR function, I was able to, and we came up with the script, and we came up with what we needed to do when we talked to this person. But before we got to that day, part of the script was to let two people know. We needed to let our head of design, who was a co-founder, and I needed to let the head of product know. Because these are two highly placed people in the organization, and this person's departure was going to definitely impact their roadmaps and what they had planned to do. And so I think we did it like 2 days in advance, right? So I was going to meet this person on a Friday, unbeknownst to this person. And then on Thursday, my HR business partner and I decided that we're going to give them, it was on Thursday. We gave them like a day's advance notice. Well, I told our head of design, he was like, wow, sorry that it came to this, but I understand. Talked to the head of product, and she was like, oh, sorry that happened. Let me know if you need any help. But then about an hour later, the head of product said, can you let your product manager know? And so we have experienced teams at Help Scout where I'm over the engineers, there's a product manager and a product designer, right? That's a fairly common, that three-leg stool of building software. And I talked to my HR business partner and said, hey, the head of product wants me to tell my product manager, right, my peer. And my HR business partner said, we really shouldn't do that. Because the more people you tell, the bigger the risk that it could leak. But this head of product was really pressuring me. And the head of product said, I'm going to talk to the head of experience. And guess who the head of experience is? That's not my boss. That's my boss's boss. Because I think you need to let your PM know. And so I was feeling pressure from multiple levels of leadership at my company. But I didn't sweat it because I was preserving dignity. And when you preserve dignity, you can sleep well at night. When you preserve someone's dignity, you can go through that stress and feel good about it. And so there were phone calls, there were Zoom, people got on Zoom, and I just waited. And eventually, the head of product said, you know what? We're going to go with your approach. We're not going to let you tell the PM. They're going to learn along with everyone else, right? And I was able to go through that because I had a human's needs placed above everyone else's. And I think that as leaders, that's part of the job. And so I had to go through the script, and we let this person go. And, it was hard on me, but guess what? It was way harder on them. And I had them know about, their severance package and how much salary they're going to get and options and stock and all this stuff. And during this ordeal, when I'm firing someone, this person said, wow, I have nothing. And then they said, yeah, I mean, I have nothing. I will always remember those words, I have nothing. And I told this person, at least for the next 15 minutes, I'm still your manager. And I want to tell you, it didn't work out here for you, but this is not the end of your career in software development. You have real strengths. And unfortunately, it's not a fit here, but you're going to be a fit somewhere else. And we went through the rest of the call, and then we hung up, and then we started all the other processes. And about a month later, this person was liking my post on LinkedIn, and they were kind of engaging me, and I was able to see them go to another company. And I was able to even see their growth. Even though I had to let this person go, we still have a good relationship because I preserved their dignity. I think it's super important, all right? So that's how you can use this leadership lesson in hiring and firing. All right, so the next lesson is going to be about the value of working software over comprehensive documentation. And this is how you can build influence, right? This is how you can influence not the team like the first value, but influence the build, what your team produces. Now, a lot of people, when they hear about this value, they think about, oh, we don't do documentation. Have you ever heard that? Like, we don't do documentation. Read the code. Trust in God, but read the code first, right? And so you have people who are like really focused on readable code, but like if you are in a remote company and I work at a fully remote company, please have documentation. Please have documentation. You cannot trust an institutional memory or even the cleanest, most readable code to help people go through your organization because they're going to hit something that's not written down. And then every time that happens, then you're going to have to come out of whatever you are working on and explain to this person, oh, this is how we do this, right? Have run books, have an onboarding process, write it down. It's so important. In Scrum, for those of you who do Scrum, we have a definition of done, which is a written list of how we know we're done with that particular feature, right? So many parts of building software involves documentation. Again, not just the documentation of how you write code, but this is how we add people to the company. This is where you go for help. One of the things that I started doing with Help Scout is whenever someone joins Help Scout, you get an email. It's called Dear New Help Scout Engineer. And whenever someone signs an offer a week before their start date, you get an email. And it says, hey, you're joining Help Scout. Welcome to our world. We're looking forward to building with you. And then when they join, on their start date, they get a Slack message. All this is automated, which says, hey, welcome to Help Scout. We're a fully remote company. Here's a few tips that you can use to be successful here. And all these emails are from the eng managers to this new engineer. And as they go through the onboarding process, they get a Slack message, some are from me, some are from another eng manager. And we did that because we know joining a remote company where you don't meet the people who you're working with can be scary, right? We have a very robust onboarding process, but it's very impersonal. And so the Dear New Help Scout Engineer series was meant to help close the gap. You get a friendly letter from a manager welcoming you to the company and giving you one piece of advice that will help you be successful. We talk about default to async. We talk about using Slack. We talk about it's okay to break things. In fact, we expect you to break things. If you're not breaking things, you're probably not trying hard enough, right? We support failing fast, failing often, right? Don't break production, but we can always revert. And so that was part of, again, that's more like the first value, but like it's a documented part of our culture. So we do documentation, but it's really easy to fall into over documentation, right? Trying to document everything. And that's why working software is so important. Someone wants us about a feature that they've been trying to work on. And so I love having design specs in Figma, and I love having specs written by the product manager. But what I love the most, shipping something. Maybe it's even a prototype or a high fidelity mock, but get something working into people's hands. Let them use it. Let them use the system. Let them give you feedback about the system. And if you build a reputation for delivering working software, you're going to build your build influence. You're going to grow your build influence. And then you'll be able to be seen by the organization as someone who gets stuff working. And that's super important. And so how do I distill this agile value down, right? How do I distill the need for working software? Working always ships faster than perfect. Working always ships faster than perfect. Now, early in my career, I would over-engineer everything. I would always try to figure out every edge case, figure out in the unit test what paths the people would go through the bugs. And like by default, we build people. We hire people who tend to think about the non-obvious, right? That becomes something that is important. But I think that so many times we need to simplify things down, right? What is the ask here? You probably heard of the phrase, make it work, make it right, make it fast. And I love that maxim. There's instances where it doesn't really apply, but I think like those guiding principles are so important for working in software. So an example from my history is we're working on a huge rewrite of a major portion of our code base. So the legacy code base is Marionette and Backbone, and I see a few people shivering in the audience because maybe you've worked with these tools before. And so this massive refactor is all about moving from Marionette and Backbone to React. And so when we started this process, when we realized that we needed to do the rewrite, it became like really documentation because we knew that leadership was going to ask, okay, you want to stop work on new features for probably 2 years to make what we already have. And I was like, yes, that's exactly what we're doing. And the reason we're doing this is because we had this feature that you want us to do in Backbone and Marionette that's probably going to take us 5 years to do if we write it in the legacy code base. So 2 years doing a rewrite is going to pay us back in spades. And so we began to figure out, okay, are we going to use NX, or are we going to, we have a design system for our application, and so how are we going to use the components? And so there was a lot of documentation, but there wasn't much progress for about 3 months. And so I was like, we made the case to leadership that they should support this 2-year rewrite, but we haven't shown much. So but I'm patient, right? I'm a patient eng manager. It's a little bit of time left, and we finally got a new repo where we're going to put the rewritten version of this kind of major part of our application. We solved like how we're going to migrate to it. We solved tests. The team solved all these things, and then we began to start building. Like, okay, now we're starting to build. And so we work with design because I'm going to tell you, any mailbox rewrite or any major rewrite is going to turn into a redesign. I can promise you, there's no way leadership is going to let you just redo the application without a redesign, right? I mean, I'm willing to bet money on that. We're working with design, and we have like in our dev environment, we begin to kind of get the glimmerings of what this is going to be, right? And this is like 6 months in. And so I went to my team, and then I talked to my peers, as managers, and we had lots of documentation, lots of designs, lots of things that the leadership team could look at. But I was like, we need to get this into production. We need to get this working. Because all that goodwill that we got 7 months ago is going to start to wear out. And we have a feature flag system that we had to figure out a couple of things. So I pushed the team to get the rewrite into production behind our feature flag so that we could deploy to production without disturbing our current users of the in production environment and then we can work on what we're not calling the kind of 2.0 version of the project. And by doing that, one, the heat from leadership went down. Two, we started doing weekly videos, demo videos, because again, we're a fully remote company. We default to recording videos and like documentation where we could show, here's the progress. Here's what we did this week. Oh, hey, we got this working. Hey, this wasn't working last week. Guess what? It's working now. So by pushing for working software, I built my build influence, but I also built my team's build influence. And leadership began to back off and begin to support this massive rewrite. Again, it's not perfect. We have a lot that we need to do, but that was really important. That was really important. So that's how I apply this lesson. All right, so let's go to customers, right? Customer collaboration. And you may not have direct customers. I know some of this is kind of from the consulting model. I started my career at Accenture. I worked at Deloitte for a little bit. And so in that model, right, we have customers and we have statements of works, and those SOWs or SOWs become legal contracts that are signed. And it's really important that you spend time trying to get the statement of work done, right? Especially if you're on a fixed price bid, right? Whereas like, okay, this is how much you're gonna make, and like, that's it. And so you can spend a lot of time going over contracts, but I really believe that it's important that we build customer influence, right? Or user influence. So how does this work? Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have contracts, right? Statements of work have meaning. Statements of work have value. They're really important. But that just means that we don't rely on contracts. You might have SLAs that you use for your system. Those are important. But that's not the basis of the relationship. That's really important. And so this is how I distill this lesson, this is a lesson from this third value. Customers trust colleagues, not contracts. If the primary motivator of your relationship with your users or your customers is a contract, I would argue you don't have a real relationship, right? You need to be working side by side with your users, with your customers, so that they can understand that we're doing this together. And then most people don't read the contracts anyway, right? That's all done by the legal team. So it's really important that you build a way to work together. So here's a story from my career about how this became real to me. So I was working for a construction software startup, and we contracted with another company to build an interface between our two software products. And by doing that, we were going to be able to, tackle new parts of the market and work together. And so when we started working together, right, I worked on the statement of work and I was involved in getting that signed, and we had all the things that were laid out. But it was like hard going those first few sprints where we were working, and we will be working on something and they would be working on the same thing, but we didn't communicate. And I pushed for just one team. Yes, they work for another company. Like the logo on their badge says something from the logo that's on my badge, but we're doing the same work. And so I created a Scrum team, a virtual Scrum team that spanned our two companies. And so we had stand-ups together. We had one unified view of the backlog, the product backlog and the sprint backlog. And by working side by side, we got so much better results. We were able to collaborate. We were able to communicate in ways that we just weren't doing before, because we were working in a trusted relationship. We even let them into our messaging system. It wasn't Slack back then, because Slack really wasn't a thing back then, but it was such a powerful way to work. And so I really encourage you that anytime you're working with someone, especially if you're working with a partner, don't just rely on the contract. Build a relationship with that person, and you get much better results. And we actually finished ahead of schedule, and we had a better partnership coming out of this. And so that's really important. I think that the manifesto puts individuals and interactions and working software before this, because it's really important that you build your team influence. that you build your build influence before you're able to build customer influence or user influence, right? You got to show that you can ship. If you can't ship, you can't do anything. So if you strengthen those practices and those patterns, then you'll be well positioned to better serve your customers and your users. All right, responding to change over following a plan. Now, a lot of people hear this, they hear this value, and they think, okay, we don't do planning, right? Who's heard we don't do planning? All right, someone said we don't do documentation. It's the same person, write things down, you don't plan? All right, brave, brave. Now, it's a fallacy that we don't do planning, right? In Scrum, there's a segment called sprint planning. We plan. We just don't excessively plan. Humanity, we are ridiculously bad at predicting the future. So we don't plan 6 months out, a year out. And again, at Accenture, I built 2-year plans in Microsoft Project that were wrong when I hit save. But that's part of the contract. And so what happens when you overplan? Guess what happens? You don't manage the developers. You're managing the plan. You're constantly updating time until and durations, and your job becomes the plan. And there's always new growth in our industry. Things change. I can't count how many times an engineer started out when we were sizing saying, okay, this is a 3, like, Fibonacci sequence, sizing stories. This is a 3. A week later, this is actually a 13. There's stuff that I just didn't know, right? I'm like, yeah, I understand. Software development's complicated, right? We're working with atoms, right? We're working with things that just are hard to understand, hard to predict. And so we don't overplan, right? We plan in sprints, or maybe we plan in quarters. I don't go beyond a quarter. So we do have planning. And so we have to embrace that the future is notoriously hard to predict. And so the lesson from this Agile value is this: don't fear surprises, fear inflexibility. Because a lot of people try to plan to avoid surprises, right? Which boggles my mind, because stuff is going to happen. Someone's going to get sick. Someone's going to quit. Someone's going to get acquired. There's going to be a reorg. All that stuff is just the reality of working in software development. And so what I really encourage people to do is don't try to eliminate surprises. Don't try to eliminate surprises, but you should always eliminate inflexibility. You always want to be flexible. And here's how this lesson played out in my career. So a few years ago, we did an accessibility audit. Has anyone ever done those, like WCOG 3.0, whatever? So you basically have someone come in and they measure how accessible your website is. And then things like, oh, you have an H2 header, but not an H1, or these colors aren't accessible. And so we got a full report. And so my supervisor, when we sat down with the report, started saying, okay, we need to plan all this out. We need to create a project plan that's going to go through every single accessibility violation, our remediation plan, and what we're going to do. And I was like, no, that doesn't make any sense, because if we do that, I'm going to be managing this plan for the next few months. And so what I did is that, okay, let's go through this report. Let's stack rank the items. Let's group them. And then let's just do what we do with Scrum, right? Let's put them into sprints. And so we started to do the remediation, and we began to knock them out. And then we began to learn, oh, this is how you remediate this color contrast item, or this is how you fix this complaint from the report. And by doing that, again, we finished ahead of schedule, but we were flexible. And so that flexibility allowed us to respond to things that we couldn't have planned, right? That's the power of this lesson. And so those are the 4 lessons from the Agile Manifesto. Again, preserve dignity at all costs. Working always ships faster than perfect. Customers trust colleagues, not contracts. And don't fear surprises, fear inflexibility. And again, I really think that these lessons are powerful ways to develop your influence smells, right? Your influence smells for the team, for the build, for the schedule, and for your customers. Very, very powerful. And leadership, when you boil it all down, is about making decisions. And when you're making decisions, it's really important that you have just a simple set of tests that you run them through. And I think that these 4 lessons are a great rubric to just run through. Hey, something happened I didn't expect. What do I do? I think it's really, really important. And you should ask yourself, if I do this, will this hurt my influence with the team? If I do this, will this hurt my influence with the build process? I think it's super, super, super important. And no matter where you are on your leadership journey, I think that the Agile Manifesto is a powerful tool for making decisions, for helping you to, when something happens that you didn't expect, when you're trying to figure out a personnel problem, when a big project lands in your lap and you got to figure out how we're going to get it done, I think you can find amazing guidance by looking to the manifesto. All right, thank you.